Welcome back, everybody, to our newest episode of Mondays with Monday, and that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation. It's been a while since we've seen each other, so hope you're enjoying the series. Today we're talking about the Civil War, and specifically we're standing in the main hallway, the first floor hallway of the League's Broad Street building, which opened May the 11th of 1865. And over the years, this hallway has become our museum gallery, if you will, to the Civil War itself. So we're going to talk about the Civil War today and various aspects of the League's participation in it. So the Union League itself was organized on December 27th of 1862 as a patriotic social society whose purpose was to suppress the rebellion, uphold the Constitution, and support Abraham Lincoln. And the League did this in various ways, one of which was to raise regiments to fight in the Civil War itself. So our first stop in our walk through the hallway is going to be at this monument that you can see in front of me on the wall. It was commissioned by the Art Association of the Union League in 1901, but was originally meant to be a memorial to the soldiers who fought in the Spanish-American War. But when that proposal was first submitted to the League membership, you can imagine that the Civil War veterans in the League were kind of scratching their head going, did they forget about us already? And so with the wisdom inborn in the members of the Art Association, they quickly realized their mistake and changed the subject to the Civil War itself, and specifically the 9 white regiments raised by the League's military committee during the war itself. The sculptor is Henry Kirk Brown from New York. There are many pieces of his sculpture in the city of Philadelphia and 2 here at the League itself. What's wonderful about this piece is that you don't have to have a PhD in art history to understand it. Very simply, the goddess of war is descending from the heavens. Here we have a Union League regiment going off to war, and this gentleman on the right-hand side is going to join them. And so the goddess of war is giving him the musket, the canteen, the bayonet, the cartridge case, the musket case, the things that he will need to fight in the war on behalf of his country itself. And here we have a woman and child, I'll take a guess and say wife and child of the man who's about to join this Union League regiment as he goes off. And even the child has its arms upraised in the same gesture as its father, all right? And that's what I mean. It's there in front of you all to understand and enjoy and appreciate. Flanking the central relief, we have the listings of those regiments that were formed by the League during the Civil War itself. And I would point out the fact that here it is the War of the Rebellion, which is really what it was at that point in time, okay? So high relief, Henry Kirk Brown, 1902. It's the first thing you see when you walk in the front door of the League building. So behind me is the newest addition to the League's art collection. It's a portrait of Frederick Douglass. Now, we're filming this on Thursday, September the 16th, and this portrait was only unveiled 2 days ago on September the 14th. Why Frederick Douglass, you might ask? Well, this portrait has been in the works, shall we say, for the last 2.5 years, because Frederick Douglass and the League had a wonderful relationship during the Civil War itself. I think it is a fair statement to say that the League, while not organized as an anti-slavery or abolitionist society, contained many members who were against slavery. And many of them had already known Douglass prior to the war in his efforts to elevate the position of African Americans in America itself. So again, the League was organized in December of 1862. And within only 4 months, Douglass has already spoken to Union League members at their clubhouse at 1118 Chestnut Street, urging them to support his efforts to get the American government to raise black regiments to fight on behalf of their country, even though their country didn't really accept them yet, during the Civil War itself. On July the 6th of 1863, just 2 days after the end of the Battle of Gettysburg, Douglass appeared at a mass meeting in Philadelphia at National Hall on Market Street between 12th and 13th. And this mass meeting was organized by the Union League and by a League member named Benjamin Brewster. And among the main speakers on the dais that day was Frederick Douglass, League member William D. Kelly, League member Benjamin Brewster, Quaker abolitionist Anna Dickinson. So it was really a stellar lineup. And since that point, Douglass was truly a friend of the League. So it is only fitting in many ways that we now have a portrait of Frederick Douglass in our collection. We've moved a few steps down the hallway, and we'll see our first painting in the magnificent hallway that we have here. So off to my left, and perhaps your right, we see 3 medals of honor by the artist Don Troiani, considered the greatest living American military artist at this point in time. The painting was commissioned by the Abraham Lincoln Foundation, which is now the Legacy Foundation of the Union League, to commemorate and honor the 150th anniversary of the creation of the United States Colored Troops here in Philadelphia through the Union League in June of 1863. The painting portrays the Battle of Newmarket Heights, September 29th of 1864, when the 6th USCT Regiment raised and trained here in Philadelphia at Camp William Penn in what is now Cheltenham Township. Right? This was its first major battle. The soldiers went in against the toughest Confederate brigade, the Texas Brigade, at the Battle of Newmarket Heights, and within a matter of 20 to 30 minutes, 52 to 57% of the regiment was on the ground, including the color guard. The color guard were always the first ones shot at, if you will, because it was considered the greatest level of dishonor if you lost your flags to your enemy. So everybody was always shooting at the color guard so they could capture the flags, if you will. In this case, the color guard is on the ground, and 3 officers rushed to grab the flags and save them from being captured by the Confederates. So on the left-hand side, we have Master Sergeant Thomas Hawkins. In the center, we have Lieutenant Nathan Edgerton, and on the right, Staff Sergeant Alexander Kelly. And for that action, these 3 officers received the Medal of Honor. Actually, this battle itself produced 18 Medals of Honor, 4 to white officers, but 14 to black officers and soldiers. It was the first time in American military history that African American soldiers received the Medal of Honor. So it is only fitting then, I think, that this particular battle is used to portray and honor the contributions of these USCT soldiers during the Civil War itself. So we're going to move across the hall to another bronze. That's okay with you. Right. So here we have Henry Ernest Goodman, long forgotten in Philadelphia history, which is regretful because he played a very important role. So Goodman was born in Philadelphia, one of 6 brothers, graduated from medical school in 1859, and at the beginning of the war in 1861, he joined the 28th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment as its regimental surgeon. And he would have that role through the summer of 1864 when he was promoted, if you will, to the medical officer's position for the Union Army of Georgia. So in 1864, what's about to happen? Sherman's March to the Sea in November and December. Now, Goodman's role was basically administrative. He wasn't a field surgeon at this point in time, but that didn't mean he couldn't become one again, because in one of the battles, there was a shortage of staff surgeons. Word got to Goodman, jumped on his horse, rode to the battlefield itself, and the first patient that he has to work on is one of his 6 brothers who was wounded in the leg. And Goodman immediately saw that in order to save his brother's life, he had to amputate his leg, and he had no hesitancy in doing it. And that's the kind of surgeon that Goodman was. Now, after the war, Goodman became a member of the Union League, and by the 1890s, he was on the board of directors of the League, and then in 1894, an officer. He was a vice president. And no doubt, I think he would have been president had he lived. But in 1896, he was running for a Reading Railroad commuter train to take him to the Tioga neighborhood in Philadelphia to visit one of his patients. He got up the steps, and in the vestibule of the passenger car, he collapsed from a heart attack and died. So perhaps not a bad way to go, right? So Henry Ernest Goodman, the sculpture was commissioned by the League from Alexander Sterling Calder, one of the patriarch of the great Calder family of sculptors here in Philadelphia. All right, so we're going to move down the hall a little bit. If you'll come with me, please. So here on the wall, we have a painting that doesn't get enough credit, if that makes any sense. It's called Harvest Home When the War Was Over by a relatively obscure Philadelphia artist named Joseph John, but it's actually a magnificent painting because in one large canvas, you can see the joys and the sorrows from that occurred during the Civil War itself. So on the left-hand side, we have widows grieving with their children, and obviously they've lost their husbands and their fathers. A little to the right, we have a soldier who survived the war in order to marry his sweetheart, and you can see her in her wedding dress right there. To the right of that, we have 3 soldiers sitting around a table, no doubt telling tall tales, which is what soldiers are wont to do. And behind them, you'll see 2 soldiers on horseback. They almost look like specters, as if they were ghosts overlooking the tableau in front of them. To the right, a soldier who also survived the war with his wife and children. And you can see the sons playing with his sword and his musket that he brought back from the war itself. And then to the far right, another soldier survived, holding his infant daughter in his hands. And to the far right of that, another soldier with his wife or sweetheart. But you can tell that he survived the war, but without a leg because he has a crutch. So just a magnificent painting that puts, again, as I said, all the joy and sorrow, the effects of war onto one canvas. And then further along the wall, and the hall, if you will, we're moving to a portrait of Union General Philip Henry Sheridan. All right. Now, Sheridan commanded the Union Army of the Shenandoah in 1864. The Shenandoah Valley in Virginia changed hands dozens of times. I mean, sometimes portions of it would change hands on a daily or weekly basis even. And it was Sheridan's job to secure the valley for the Union Army. So we're in Winchester, Virginia. The Union Army occupied it. The Confederate Army had pushed the Union soldiers out. Sheridan was returning from meetings in Washington, D.C. when he got news that the Union Army had been routed. And he quickly, with his staff, they quickly galloped forward to Winchester, where Sheridan quickly rallied his soldiers again, and they retook the city of Winchester. And it became known as Sheridan's Ride, October the 18th of 1864. So members of the League and the League commissioned this portrait from a local artist, poet, and sculptor named Thomas Buchanan Reed, who's from Chester County, actually Honeybrook of all places. And this is Buchanan Reed's depiction of that famous event during the Civil War. And actually, Reed wrote a poem called Sheridan's Ride, and by the end of the war, it was practically mandatory for every Union school child to memorize that poem, probably the most memorized one during the war itself. So there we are. So a magnificent painting. Now, what's going to happen very shortly is that while the Douglass portrait will remain in the hallway for a few weeks for members and others to get to see it and know it, down at their level and up close and personal perhaps, you can see that it's going to replace the Sheridan painting probably mid to late October. So you'll see Douglass here on this wall, and then the Sheridan painting will go to the 15th Street stairwell, which is completely devoted to Civil War subjects, which makes sense. All right, so we're going to walk down the hall just a little further, so if you'll come with me. So over my shoulder, I hope you can see this magnificent marble monument, and one of the earliest, if not the earliest, in the Civil War itself. Just a matter of weeks after the war ended on April the 9th of 1865, the Union League commissioned this sculpture from a member of the League, one of its own, James Henry Hazeltine. Hazeltine came from a large family of painters and sculptors here in Philadelphia. James Henry had studied at PAFA, Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, but at the time of the war, he was in Rome studying to be a sculptor, learning more about being a sculptor. When the war broke out, Hazeltine returned to Philadelphia. He joined the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry, Rush's Lancers, joined the Union League eventually, and then luckily for him survived the war. And it was shortly after the end of the war that Hazeltine, who had returned to Rome, received the commission to create this monument to the Civil War itself. It is called America Mourning Her Fallen Brave, and you can see that Columbia, as she was referred to in the 19th century, is wearing a Liberty cap, don't forget, all right, want to point that out. But she's also holding 2 sets of Victorian mourning wreaths, one representing the north, perhaps the one over her breast, and one to the south, perhaps the ones at her side. And I think what Columbia is doing is she is mourning the fact that in the Civil War, both sides suffer, not just one or the other. So the message, reconciliation, because a country that was divided by a civil war needs to reconcile and reunite. And I think that was the message that the members and the League were trying to portray through this beautiful, magnificent marble monument, America Mourning Her Fallen Brave. Now, we'll look across the hall, and this is really rare, folks. I can't think of any place else in an art museum where you'll find this occurrence, but we have a painting done by Émilie Rouen, a French artist, because she captured the image of James Henry Hazeltine at his studio in Nice, France, shortly after he completed sculpting a portrait bust of America Mourning Her Fallen Brave. Hazeltine had moved his studio to Nice for a brief period of time, and Nice is just over the Italian-French border. So Rouen painted Hazeltine in his studio in that magnificent velvet jacket with all those buttons, and look at that mustache on top of all of that. So here you have the sculpture, a portrait bust, and the original piece itself, America Mourning Her Fallen Brave. So that concludes our tour of the first floor hallway of the League's Broad Street building, where we have our magnificent Civil War collection, among many magnificent pieces itself. And there's much more to see, don't get me wrong, and we'll see them all eventually. But that'll end today's episode of Mondays with Monday, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you'll keep enjoying these episodes as much as we do presenting them to you. So everybody, until the next one, stay well, stay safe, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.